Welcome to another episode of the Driver's Alert Driving Safety Podcast, where we interview some of the most influential people in driving safety. Every day in America, 28 people die as a result of drunk driving. In fact, driving while under the influence of alcohol is so pervasive, it is estimated that 1 in 3 people will be involved in a drunk driving crash at some point in their lifetime. Our guest today is trying to do something about this. Nguyen is the Vice President of Digital Marketing at Intoxalock, the industry leader in alcohol monitoring. For more than 30 years, Intoxalock has been committed to helping people live and drive responsibly with its cutting-edge ignition interlock device. At Intoxalock, Laura is responsible for generating public awareness of ignition interlock devices, improving her company's client experience, and launching new tools and services. Laura, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Before we jump into the topic of ignition interlock devices, where are we on the issue today of drunk driving? Is it getting better or worse? Are we making any progress?
Yeah, so the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration came out in 2017, and actually that year that was the lowest percentage of drunk driving fatalities that happened since like 1982. So the good news is that we're seeing the drunk driving numbers decrease, but I think there's still so much that we can do about it. If you think about it holistically, drunk driving accounts for 29% of all major vehicle fatalities. So that's a lot of people that it impacts, and there's a lot that we can do.
Do you think it's just, is there a combination of things at play here? Public service announcements, awareness campaigns. Obviously, the laws are pretty strict around the country. I know just this year, Utah passed the .05 blood alcohol limit law. So there's definitely a stronger push for it. But is it a combination of different things you think that are all at play?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely a combination. You think about state regulations vary state by state. There are a lot of states that have actually moved to first offender laws as well. So that really helps, make sure that for subsequent drunk driving incidences, we can help manage that really early and upfront, make sure that we're creating the awareness that needs to be created. And then also for folks that have to get an ignition interlock device, that helps also with recidivism rates as well. So really what we're doing is looking at the holistic system, and then also think about the introduction, right, of Uber and Lyft. So there's options for folks too. And I think a lot of folks are thinking a lot more about before they get in the car, what are things they should probably be doing instead.
Now, I'm sure most of us have probably heard about the ignition interlock device. Maybe they didn't know it was called that. But just to kind of help set the stage, what actually is an ignition interlock device and how does the technology work?
Yeah, so an ignition interlock device is essentially a handheld breathalyzer that's installed within your vehicle that stops you from, basically prevents your car from starting if you have a blood alcohol level reading. So each state is different. We set them based on state regulation, and then it stops the car from actually starting. So that's essentially what it is, a handheld device, the size of a cell phone, basically.
And is that installed in the steering wheel area?
It's actually, so it's connected. I'm not an engineer, but
Sure.
it is connected through the starter of the vehicle. So essentially, it's an intermittent from the starter of the vehicle, and then the handheld comes through to the interior of the vehicle. And then from the interior of the vehicle, that's where the device is actually. So it's connected to the relays within the car.
And generally, how reliable is the technology? I'm sure there's a little bit of wiggle room in there, but it's pretty reliable, I'm assuming.
Yes, and it is state reviewed. We are all state compliant, so we always make sure that we're following state regulation.
Now, typically when we think of the ignition interlock device, we think of somebody that was court ordered to install one in their vehicle because they received a DUI. However, I do understand that there's a growing market of those who are voluntarily installing these devices into their vehicles. And so at first, my understanding, Intoxalock is in 45 states now where the device is mandatory as a result of of a state law or some court order. You're compliant within 45 states. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
And then in the rest of the country, you have have access to the entire market for the voluntary market, or do you call it something else? Is it voluntary market, or is there another term?
Yeah. We call it voluntary, and voluntary can be a few things.
Okay.
So voluntary could be maybe there's not a program in that specific state. Voluntary also means for us customers who currently have an ignition interlock in their vehicle, but they're coming up to the end of their time, and they've chosen to then basically retain it to make sure that there's just a peace of mind safety, right? Of it's, I'm not going to basically get in a car and drink and drive again. Voluntary can also mean parents of young drivers who want to make sure that their teenage and college age kids aren't getting in the car and drinking and driving as well. So overall, when we think about voluntary ignition interlocks, it's just about making sure that we're instilling driver safety habits for everyone, whether it's someone that has had a drunk driving incident in the past or someone who's trying to prevent it.
And what is the approximate cost of this device? Is there a range? What factors affect the price?
Yeah, it's $60 to $80. There is a range based on state. So each state is a little bit different. States do kind of mandate depending on that as well. And then also for us, from an installation perspective, it depends on the year, make, model, what's actually within your vehicle. Like if you have a remote start, for example, that does influence the pricing.
And is it pretty much plug and play, or is there some kind of ongoing maintenance required of the device, or once it's installed, it's pretty much it's ready to go for a set period of time?
Yeah, so every state will have regulations in terms of what they call calibration, where you have to go in and take it to a service center. So it can be 30, 60, 90 days that they have to go in and get it essentially recalibrated. And what that means essentially is making sure the device is functioning the way it is. And in some situations too, especially because you've got a monitoring authority, we'll make sure that we retain and send records to that monitoring authority.
Now, the vehicles continue to get more expensive. We're adding more safety features. There's collision avoidance technology that many of the newer vehicles now have. There are pros and cons, of course. I mean, sometimes they can be annoying. Things are beeping too much, or the brakes are applied too many times. You're not even understanding why. But there are some groups who are out there who are actually calling, and they've been doing this for some time now, for mandatory installing of these ignition interlock devices in all new vehicles. There was one study I saw that said that on average, a convicted drunk driver, by the time they're arrested, they've actually driven drunk 80 times on average. And I think that's incredible. So given that and just this push maybe for having it mandatory, what are your thoughts generally on this?
Yeah, we're intimately aware of that stat. We use it daily too. And you think about what our device does in terms of making sure that we're keeping drunk drivers off the road. Even just with our device alone in 2018, basically we stopped 160,000 starts with someone that had actually an over BAC level. So when you think about that and you think about the impact that IIDs have within the marketplace, but then you think about when we think about our overall mission that we want to help people live and drive responsibly. So whether that means having some of these, more safety technology features built within the car at point of sale, I think that it does provide, opportunity. And really it helps make sure that we're keeping our roads safe.
And you said 160,000 stops prevented or starts prevented?
Yeah.
That's
yep.
incredible.
Startup attempts prevented. Exactly.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I guess since 2002, all 50 states have considered 0.08 as the legal limit until the beginning of this year when, as I mentioned, Utah passed the 0.05 limit. Maybe help us understand just how easy is it for somebody to become legally over the limit? Can it literally be one drink?
Yeah. So if you think about it, right, there's just multiple variables that impact your blood alcohol level. That's your weight, your height, your metabolism, how your body interacts with alcohol. And so with that, it could be one drink. And so I think when you think about different varying rules and regulations by state, it's really important for people to understand what their state regulations are so that they can make sure that they're staying safe, keeping others around them safe, and the overall community safe.
Yeah, and it was interested. Since we're based in Florida, I was taking a look at just some interesting side notes about Florida law, and I found that virtually in any state, an officer can arrest you even if you are under the blood alcohol limit, as long as you have some alcohol in your system, and that the officer has made a determination that there was some level of impairment based on his observation of your driving characteristics. So it's really something to think about when you talk about getting into the vehicle with just a little bit of alcohol in your system, and just how much you are playing with other people's lives, your life, as well as just all of the resulting financial impact that it can have on your life if you do get convicted of a drunk driving incident. So what prevents an intoxicated person from somehow overriding or cheating the system? Are there measures in place that can assure that someone won't use someone else to breathe into the device and then get the car started?
Yeah, there are. So more and more states are actually requiring camera units installed within, in conjunction with the ignition interlock device as well. So that will essentially take a picture of the person as they're blowing into the device. Again, what we do is we send these pictures to monitoring authorities, so that way the monitoring authority can make sure that the person whose ID is required to have the device is also the same person that needs to make sure that they are blowing into the device. So those are the types of things that we help make sure of. We also make sure that from an engineering perspective, right, you can't fake a blow test essentially. So you can't have someone else blow in, or let's say roll your window down and stick the device through so there's air blowing through. So we want to make sure that the folks who are actually blowing the device should be those people, but also at the same time that we're also providing data to our monitoring authorities as well. We work really closely with the states to do that.
I also saw something called a rolling test. I don't know if Intoxalock uses this or not, but is that how? I don't know how that works. Like, you have to continue to blow into the device in the middle of driving, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we have what we call random retests. They're state required, actually. So the states will require them at different cadences. Usually what will happen is the driver will have, it will go off, let's say 10 to 15 minutes from starting the vehicle, to make sure that not only were you sober when you started the vehicle, but you're also sober as you're driving the vehicle. So you're not literally drinking and driving. And so with that, they'll have 4 to 6 minutes to complete their retest, which gives them enough time if they need to like pull over, or if they're not in a spot where they feel comfortable. So they've got 4 to 6 minutes to do that. And then if for some reason they might fail that random retest, the vehicle doesn't turn off or anything like that. They'll actually hear a horn or a car lights kind of honks just to give a warning during that time. But they are state regulated, they're state mandatory. So we want to make sure that we're abiding by those too.
So thinking about, again, the voluntary market, I guess some of the motivating factors, I mean, let's kind of talk about this for a little bit, about what can someone expect if they do get pulled over for a DUI and they are over the limit, all the court costs, jail time, possibly you could get terminated from your job. I mean, just some of the impact that can have on someone's life.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're arrested and convicted of a DUI, the cost can range from 10 to 15,000 is what we've seen. So to your point, the court costs, every state has varying court costs, right? There's different penalties, different fines. So that can average around $10,000. There's a potential of jail time, right? So for first offenders, jail time can usually be time served from the arrest date, depending on the state. It all depends on whether it's a few days or maybe weeks. So that depends as well. The additional costs incurred from having to get SR22 or high risk insurance is another component, right? You think about making sure that, the cost and coverage of insuring high risk drivers now, that's another component that they have to think about. That can be very taxing. There could be a license suspension. Is the other piece. So you think about, for first time DUI convictions, license suspensions also vary state by state. So those are other pieces. You add to that the IID piece, there's treatment that they'll have to go through, any alcohol assessments that they'll have to go through. So it's a long process, and it's an extremely stressful process as we work with our customers and help them through their pain points. And so our goal is to try to help them through the process and help provide a level of empathy and compassion, right, as they're going through it, because it can be very taxing for a mistake that they made. And in some situations, to your point, there is a risk of even being terminated from your job.
If a DUI offense is severe enough, or let's say it's a repeat offender, is it actually possible that someone could literally become uninsurable?
I don't know if I can speak intelligently to that because I don't really manage the SR22 high risk insurance space. I don't know if I think it's more of just the fact that, they are required to have high risk insurance to be able to drive.
Yeah, I was just thinking off the top of my head, I imagine that for a repeat offender, I mean, sure, somebody will insure you, but the cost might be so significant at that point that for all intents and purposes, it might prevent you from even really being able to drive anymore. And it's also interesting, too, because we're a fleet safety company. And so if you drive for a living and you get your license suspended, you're pretty much unemployable. So that really makes it difficult. It's a really costly decision if somebody makes the wrong one.
Absolutely.
What about so you mentioned court costs, you mentioned, of course, you jail time. What about in the case if there's a criminal, some kind of criminal involvement, so you are under the influence and then you happen to, run over a pedestrian or in an accident where someone actually dies. Now you're talking about vehicular manslaughter, and so it's not just the cost and the effect in you personally with respect to your job, but now you're talking about you could be completely, your life is turned upside down legally and criminally.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about the stress of the process, but we also, when you think about if there happened to be a fatality during a drunk driving incident, what that means. And so the outcomes, right, when you think about it for maybe more criminal types of situations where you're being charged with additional, to your point, if it's reckless endangerment or child endangerment or vehicular manslaughter, all of those in conjunction with your level of intoxication. So most states actually have stricter penalties when you think about that for those with a higher level of alcohol within them.
Let's shift to the product suite for a moment. So my understanding is you have 3 different products in Intoxalock. At least what I saw was you had the Legacy, the eLearn, and the eLearn 24. Does that summarize the product suite?
Yeah. So we currently have 3 different products available to customers today. Each state legislation actually will mandate what device you have, other than if you're on a home monitoring device, which is the eLearn 24. So that's a 24-hour home monitoring device that you were saying earlier. So it really depends on, when you think about the primary products that we have is the Legacy device, which is our kind of more basic device. It depends again on state regulation. Then we have our eLearn device, which are the ones with the cameras that we talked about earlier.
And did any of these have a real-time reporting component to them where that's mandatory?
Yes. So the eLearn device is a real-time reporting. Yep. So when you think about making sure, especially with the camera and the data feeds on there, those are being fed into our system, and then we make sure that we're sharing that with the monitoring authorities as well.
What about what's on the horizon for Intoxalock? Any interesting initiatives or technologies or things that you've been exploring or currently looking at releasing?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, that's my personal passion point, right? Being a digital marketer and looking at how digital technologies can help bridge together. It's also a mission for the company too. So as we talk about today, we've talked a lot about, what's the impact? I think one of the things that we want to look at is creating a more seamless experience for our customers as well. So knowing that they've gone through an extremely stressful experience as they've gone through, been arrested and convicted of DUI, what are all the friction points? There's a lot of points of judgment through each one of those phases. And so what we want to make sure that we're doing is helping them through the process. So we're creating actually digital tools and resources that will help them manage that process in a more seamless fashion, meaning essentially having what they need to manage their account, manage a device, get information that they need to, and also help with some, if you think about, let's say, gamification elements of helping them learn about how to use a device, but also just instilling and living, like we talked about earlier, just creating safer habits within it as well. So more digital tools. I can't share too much. It's coming later this year, so I'm really excited about that. But we will have new tools and resources for customers.
Aside from making the installation of ignition interlock devices mandatory, let's say that's not feasible, what more can we all do together to help make this problem, and maybe not completely go away, that might be too idealistic, but at least make the roads safer with respect to drunk driving? What can we do?
Honestly, I think we need to have the conversation is ultimately what we as people need to do right around our communities and within our, even within our government and legislation. So I think the key piece that we have to think through is what's the social impact that we can have, and what's the legislative impact that we can have within each of our states and our communities. So the key there is thinking about contacting your state representatives, making sure they understand the severity of the issue, that you want to make sure that you have safer roads. So a lot of states have, like we talked about, implemented first offender laws to make sure that, we're trying to get ahead of the game a little bit. The other piece is having the conversation for those who, as simple as the public awareness component of making sure that your friends don't get in a car after they've had that drink or two, and just making sure they're thinking about that as well.
How can we learn more about what Intoxalock is doing?
Yeah, so you can go to our website for sure. So intoxalock.com. We're on, all the social channels: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. There's tons of information available for us there. We publish articles regularly about making sure that we're understanding the, the risk of, drinking intoxicated, and what are the things that we can do. So there's tons of resources available. So feel free to always reach out.
Before we go, what about any final party message about the ignition interlock devices in general, or just the topic of drunk driving? Anything you'd like to leave us with?
I think the biggest thing for us to think about is that as a community and as those who want to keep our roads safe, making sure that we're doing as much as we can around the legislative front, around the personal front, and around educating ourselves on our state laws and regulations.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Laura. I appreciate your time today. Thank you for your wisdom, insights, and experience, and I think this is very helpful. So you guys are doing a great job over there. This is some super important work, and I wish you the best.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Once again, that was Laura Nguyen. She's the Vice President of Digital Marketing at Intoxalock. To stay up to date on our latest podcast episodes, please follow the Drivers Alert Driving Safety podcast page at driversalert.com/driving-safety-podcast. There you will also be able to sign up for episode notifications as well as browse our episode archives. And don't forget, the Drivers Alert Driving Safety podcast is the podcast that features the most influential people in driving safety. Until next time, please drive safely.